Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session for the Spark Conference. A really interesting and very much top of mind topic for a lot of people in our industries right now, AI and specifically generative AI. It's a conversation I'm really excited to be joined by some heavy hitters in the creative industries from Canada. And so, yeah, I'm going to start by introducing everybody, and then we're going to just dive right in. So first off, we're joined by Manuel Sainsily. Manu is an artist, a TED speaker, an instructor at McGill University at UMass Boston, and is also running a masterclass, one of the first that's actually touching on generative AI. We're also joined by William Selviz, a design technologist, an educator, an immersive filmmaker, director, the founder of Render Media, and also somebody who's working heavily in the Gen AI space, doing brand collaborations with the likes of Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI. And then we're also joined by the wonderful Debi Wong. Debi is a creative producer. She's the founder and director of Naissance Opera, and is also the executive producer and curator of Signals. Signals, which some of you may be familiar with, is a BC-based festival that is aligned with the Vancouver Film Festival and showcases emerging technology for storytelling and interactivity. So yeah, I'm so excited to have you guys with us. It's been an incredible couple of years, really, since the first AI generators have started to hit the market. Obviously, OpenAI, Runway, Midjourney, they sort of changed the landscape of how we create. And we're going to get into some of the specifics of what that means for us, what it means for industry and for the future of art and creativity. But one thing that was clear to me from Signals this year was there is a lot of people putting a lot of work in to creating things with these new tools. And actually, William and Manu, you guys were there with a piece called Protopica, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what was exciting about that piece was not only was it the first time I think a lot of people had actually seen Gen AI used in a creative concept, but also you were one of the lucky few around the world that was invited by OpenAI to use the new Sora application to video generate. So I think it would be great just to maybe kick off with that. So Will, Manu, do one of you guys want to kick off and just kind of give us an oversight of what that project is, how it came about, and the work you've done with OpenAI and how it all came together? And we will also, during this, we will show a trailer of the piece so people can see what we're talking about. But yeah, do you guys want to just kick it off and let us know how that came about?
You want to start, Will?
Yeah, I'll start. Sorry, I'm a disembodied voice today. I'm currently in Mexico for a production, and unfortunately my connection doesn't allow me to turn on my camera, but it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, what you mentioned is very much aligned with our intention, which was to bring generative AI video models to the public in a way that was not just for the sake of showcasing the technology, but also having a very important role in cultural preservation and just alignment from a universal perspective so that people could relate to not just the film, but the overall project. But Protopica, as I mentioned, is a much larger initiative that Manu and I started individually about 5 years ago. That when we met about 2 years ago, we decided to join forces and like essentially bring this to life in many different phases. So the first phase was this film with OpenAI, which I'll let Manu elaborate a little bit more on the process as well and on other aspects, but it was a very much a surprise to us to have the opportunity to bring this to life at Signals this year using brainwave interactive interfaces. So EEG technologies or BCI is a topic that we're really passionate about. So having the opportunity to bring together Gen AI video and turn into an interactive experience where people can have a more customized film experience based on their mental state was a pretty big accomplishment for us that we are pretty happy about.
Nous pas seulement résultat à chance, fait dans des circonstances au hasard. Ah ouais. Existence en nous, c'est résultat en voyage profond. On quête à l'esprit en nous pour trouver un toile idéal pour y pépendre assis. Imaginez un espace, plus loin qui monde physique en nous, un espace liminal où ces esprits-là qu'à migrer et qu'à explorer une infinité de possibilités. À dans espace là ça, les esprits en nous qu'à morphoiser. Qu'à essayer un paquet de formes, jusqu'à ce qu'ils trouvent un vaisseau idéal à yo. À pas un processus qui a fait au hasard, mais un travail méticuleux. Une recherche faite à une échelle cosmique. L'esprit en nous qu'a examiné chaque opportunité et qu'a pesé chaque chemin qui peut développer. Est-ce que nous qui fait d'un privilège ou à d'une difficulté? Choix là bien réfléchi. Parce que l'esprit en nous qu'a cherché ces expériences-là qui changé nous au plus profond. Finalement, il choisit parfaite incarnation-là. Un nouveau débat pour destiner à y. La vie là nous qu'à vivre pas un accident, mais un voyage bien préparé, que essence éternelle en nous, créée pour nous.
I actually hold one of the devices that Will made us work with for this project, which is the Muse headband. It has 5 channels on the forehead that you put right there, and it's able to read your different brain waves, like Will said. And then we're using this in real time, using a kind of a very complex system in the background that's normalizing the data that we are getting and allowing the users to not just be going through a passive experience of watching a film, but actually interacting with it. We have backgrounds, both Will and I, in 3D art, immersive direction. So being able to also tell a story, not just from a video perspective, but involving other senses was super important to us. And also because of the cultural aspect of both being from Caribbean backgrounds, Venezuela for Will, Guadeloupe for me, we wanted the short film to use Guadeloupean Creole to talk about the concept of dying languages and how we can preserve culture using emerging technology. There's this indigenous background also that we're bringing into the film, tapping into folk tales and stories that, you know, from forgotten past and futures. And I think it resonated a lot with the local community in Vancouver because of also the connection with Indigenous Canadian. And I find that it's very interesting to see the people react and play with this experience and hearing their feedback as they realized that it was something very meditative, very profound. They felt connected to the story, but they really enjoyed the interaction with the tools. I think AI is usually something very obscure that people get to see or hear about, but it's very not often that they have a chance to really get hands-on and brain on in our case with it. And so Will and I are all really proud of this, but this is just the first phase of many different iterations. We're already working with other companies for adding more channels, different headbands with different brainwaves capabilities, and hopefully more senses as well. Will has connections with people in the olfactive aspect, so we're trying to bring more senses to the experience, basically.
Wonderful. And what was interesting there, you said that this has been a project that's sort of been in the works for 5 years. Obviously, 5 years ago, we knew probably that AI and generative AI was coming. I'm not sure we expected it to arrive as quickly as it did. I think especially when we first sort of saw those first images coming out of Midjourney with the spaghetti mouth and things like that. At what point was it then that Protopica became an AI project, and how did you sort of bring that aspect to it, and where did the relationship with OpenAI come into it, and getting a first look at Sora? I mean, that must have been very exciting for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let Will start because he is the first to actually have had an art exhibition working with Meta just before mine, and that's how we met.
Yeah. Well, worth highlighting as well that there's a big alignment as well with Debi, who's in our part of this conversation as well, and bringing this to life this year at Signal. So I wanted to give her a shout out for also curating our work since pretty much day one. So yeah, to answer your question, I do have I feel like everything was very serendipitous, like the way that it played out. For me, before Protopica, I had a project called Entropy in Protopia. That's a project that man was referring to. It was a lot of work that I did in recreating memories from back home, using anything from 3D scanning to 3D animation to any sort of tool that I was already working professionally with, even 360 video, in a way that made sense to share with people. So when Meta approached me to work on a art show, which was more of a community event to make people aware of the technologies like virtual reality and so on, but more so for underrepresented communities. Um, I definitely sensed in that room that there was a lot of appetite for stories that weren't just the ones being told by major studios. And they were more grassroots and more, yeah, like bespoke, or more told from like the people themselves, right? So that was a big opportunity that I saw in like 2019, 2020, that if this is the course that things are taking, where Gen AI is going to be able to empower a much smaller team of people to create narratives that are very compelling, that take a lot, let's say less resources for a smaller team to accomplish, or to even compete with the big players. I think that was a net positive for a lot of filmmakers, smaller filmmakers, and people in general. We can dive obviously more in the nitty gritty of what that implies, but for me, that was like the starting point. And just fast forwarding to Manu and I alpha testing a lot of the tools that gave OpenAI the recognition that it has today, for example, DALL-E and ChatGPT and so on, and having proven our value there in terms of, yeah, just providing very specific insight from a cultural perspective, but also Manu being such a amazing UX UI designer, and myself having a background in different media. It was very yeah, it was pretty much like an opportunity that came up from just being there at the right place at the right time, and having consistently participated and working with them in so many ways. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, we'll touch a little bit more on the tools themselves, but also, with regards to Debi, I mean, absolutely, you're doing some incredible work yourself in the creative industries, and also want to ask you about that and how you're going to see AI interacting with the work that you're doing, not only with Renaissance Opera, but other projects you've got going on, Debi. But when it comes to Protopica and Signals this year, I mean, what a change it must have been for someone curating a festival like Signals, because I think probably for the last 5, 6, 7 years that we've been very heavily into VR, AR, and XR. But then this new paradigm has come along. I was just so curious on how you tackled Signals this year, and what was your thought process for integrating AI. Just such a different landscape, and the curation process must have been a lot different for you. Just wonder if you could talk a little bit about Signals this year, because it felt like this year was a real step up from what had happened before. You guys have done an incredible job over the last few years of building this into a really great exhibition of Canadian work, Indigenous work. I think it's really important to say that the work you did with IM4 is incredibly important for that event. And I think, yeah, you and everybody at DigiBC deserves a lot of credit for what you're doing there with limited resources, I'm sure. So yeah, do you want to just give a bit of an overview of Signals this year, and how AI played a big part in that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Signals was really exciting this year. As you said, it just got a lot bigger than it was last year.
Yes.
But the thing that we're always trying to do with Signals, with myself, Lockdown, and Loretta Todd, the other co-curators, is to make it let it serve as a platform for opening conversation and to breaking down barriers to access to creative technology and access to understanding our creative technologies and how they're impacting our lives, our communities, our world. And so, of course, this year with the explosion of AI art making, there was a great opportunity to really look at what are those conversations that we feel we must have, and how do we curate artistic works that can help empower those conversations. Because I think there's this horrible trend in the media to depict anything that has to do with creative technology or technology in general as doom and gloom. So I mean, we're all aware of the one end of the conversation around AI of the robot revolution and we're all going to die. But then there's this other side that Will and Manu are both touching on, which is that there is this opportunity, and what we are seeing is this like great democratization of tools, of creativity, of access to creating artistic works, of empowering creativity, and I think as curators, it's our job to really think about what are we bringing in that can help anyone in our community walk into the exhibit and start to understand this technology in a new way. And with AI, it's so complex. It's so scary if you know nothing about it. If you know everything about it, it's still scary. It's still exciting. And I think that with something like this technology, which is already impacting all aspects of our world, all aspects of our lives, whether we want it to or not, we have to encourage everyone to step into the conversation. We need those multi-perspectives, those diverse perspectives coming into this conversation. It can't be a conversation for just the gatekeepers and just the people who are creating these technologies. And that is, that kind of comes out of like our last iteration of being on the internet and social media, and those guardrails or those things that we didn't know when we were getting into the world that we're into now. We have a better know-how now. So I think that's part of what our job as curators is to really empower those conversations. And so this year the curation was all about that.
And I'm assuming you got a lot of submissions, and it took a lot for you to work through to find those pieces that really do cater to those things that you've just been talking about. Was it difficult kind of like trying to find that happy medium between what's really sincere and showcasing a technology but with real story and impact to people versus that ability to create things very quickly now and submit them? Was you finding that, or was it? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, we did our curation and our intake a little bit differently this year. So one of the things we launched was called our XR Producers Lab, because one of the unique things about Signals curation is that we don't just take a work and present it. We work with the artists ahead of time, and we talk to them about the conversations we want to have. We talk about how we're going to integrate like virtual and digital into the physical world so that there's a really, there's a good feel and flow to the whole experience. So the exhibit doesn't feel like segmented pieces, but something that is that each exhibit is part of something bigger. So there's a kind of like a producer aspect to what we do when we bring in a work. But that takes a lot more work. It takes a longer runway. So this year when we launched the XR Producers Lab, that was our call for projects, for people to come in with compelling ideas. And that's how we ended up with Will and Manu and Protopica in the festival this year. We loved this concept, and we loved the idea of using AI to talk about cultural preservation, to talk about languages that are becoming extinct, and to talk about how do we bring visions of new intercultural, interconnected futures to life with these tools. So we were able to work with Will and Manu on a much longer runway to kind of help support the project, but then also figure out how it can fit into that bigger conversation. And then the other aspect of our curation is seeking out projects that are already out there and that are making a big splash or feeding into these conversations that we want to have. So one of the big projects, well, two that we found this year that we were really excited about was AI and Me by the German group Motz. And we thought this was such an interesting piece. You go into a little cubicle, you sit in front of a little like old CRT screen, and the AI just asks you to kind of look at the machine and tells you it's dreaming about you and thinking about you. And then it creates images of how it perceives you. And the images are outrageous and whimsical and silly and shocking. They're all the things. But what I loved about this project is that it immediately shows you the biases and what goes into training our models in a very quick, simple, provocative way. So everyone had a strong reaction to this exhibit. And then people started asking, well, why did it depict me like that? And so instead of telling people that our models are trained in biased ways or that we need to question that, we could show them immediately and they could have a visceral reaction to it. And then I hope that kind of thing leads to them looking those things up or deepening their understanding. So it's finding that interplay of, again, creating a multi-perspective conversation about these technologies.
Yeah, I actually did that piece myself. I was actually quite impressed with the output, if I'm honest with you. I was like, I wish I could look like that. Um, that's great, and I think also for yourself, as the sort of director of Renaissance Opera and sort of the interactive creative work you're doing there, has things changed yet in the way that you're approaching these types of works that you're producing at the moment? Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're now sort of leveraging these tools to think about your workflows?
Yeah, so I mean, we've always been a really small team, but we produce really big things. Um,
Yes.
it's challenging because, first of all, we're a BIPOC queer-led company, and it's our purpose and our goal and our mandate to be serving BIPOC queer communities. And so when we built our company and built our workflows and our processes and our policies, it's all coming from that place. But of course, we live in a world that is not built by BIPOC queer communities. There's always a bit of tension, and there's always, more importantly, there's always extra work that goes into what we do. And so with these new tools that are coming out, we're finding that, we're all a bunch of creatives, we're all artists. We're finding that all of those like administrative things that we just take up like 70% of our capacity can be alleviated with new AI tools that can go into those jobs that we don't want to do. We can't hire other people to do. So it's just putting on all of that extra weight onto our plates. Creatively, it's been really interesting. We've had a lot of conversations about how do we talk about how we're using it and why we're using it, what are our boundaries around that. And it's an evolving conversation, but we used generative AI for the first time with similar to Protopica. We had our dancer in motion capture, and it was connected to Touch Designer and a Gen AI model in Unreal. And every time our dancer moved, the imagery would change. And the story was about personal transformation and exploration of identity. And so, as this character was exploring themselves, they start as an apple seed, and then turn into an apple tree, and then turn into a dragon. And this is like a really it helped deepen the story, and it's not something our small team could ever create visually if we didn't have access to these tools. And so I think there's just an interesting conversation about empowering creativity and access to those things, and being able to produce on an even larger scale for equity serving deserving people, and for small teams that could never do that in the first place.
That's a really great point there, and that kind of opens up that conversation that I wanted to get into. For instance, for me recently, I had a conversation with somebody and sort of asked me what my biggest fear was, and what came out of my mouth was it wasn't the end of human creativity. It was like more the erosion of human creativity. But this is where the paradox lies. I think it's opening up doors to people that would never be able to create those type of assets that would cost a fortune through a VFX workflow. And I think that's where it's so interesting right now, because there's a lot of fear and trepidation in industries that the creatives that have sat there on those seats to build those are now losing their jobs. But then on the other side, it's opening the door, these tools, for people that have never created anything in their life to actually create. Manu, you're obviously doing your masterclass, and I'm assuming you touch a lot on like the sort of ethics and using these tools in a responsible way. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that for us, and give us an insight into what you've been doing in that realm?
Absolutely. I think there is a lot to be said on the side of what we call responsible AI. It's rare that we use the word ethical AI because it's never fully ethical, right? And even when we participated with Signals, we had amazing participation from indigenous communities giving talks on the subject of self-sovereignty and how AI is being used even also right now as a colonizing tool to tap into data that have been harvested by universities or government and then sold back as private data to companies to be training their amazing models on. And then those indigenous communities trying to build stories using tools that they finally can access to tell their stories have now to pay back the colonizer money to be able to access the model that have been trained on their own data. There's a lot to be said there. And as a Caribbean person born in Guadeloupe, I'm myself still living in a neo-post-colonialism world, and the relationship between Guadeloupe and France is still very vivid and active and complex. I was last week in Guadeloupe talking about Protopica and the work that we do with Will on the subject of cultural preservation. And I was astonished to see how many people didn't know about the tools that we're using, even though they've been out there for 2 to 3 years, because there's not as much education that's done in the space from that perspective. And people, because they tend to be afraid, that's the narrative that larger communities or larger governments are using to prevent smaller communities from using them, keeping us in fear, avoid us from learning, avoid us from prevent us, sorry, from learning and from actually using these tools for the right way. And so I consider myself a technological optimist person, even though I'm aware of the risks and I educate on the ethical side of things. I do it in a way to also inspire and show the right way to use those technologies, because we have enough dystopia. I own a bunch of books behind me from Isaac Asimov, The Laws of Robotics, and we've been talking and giving the blueprints for cyberpunk dystopias for decades, centuries.
Yes.
But I believe that we don't have enough narrative and storytelling on the universe of the possibles, on the protopian futures, to use Will's Entropy and Protopia project and quote it. And that's what we're trying to do with Protopica. We're trying to tell stories that are more optimistic, that are tapping into the sense of community, what the internet was built to be. Mozilla gave me the opportunity to receive an amazing awards back in August in Dublin called Rise 25, actually recognizing the work that we do in ethical AI. And the whole goal of this project was to rebuild and retake the internet, reappropriate it in a better way. And I think that if we can inspire the new generation and our politics and our governments to understand that regulations needs to be made, but not in a way to prevent people from using these tools, but just to pave a way to use these tools the right way. I think that we're empower a lot of people to finally have an opportunity to tell these stories, to preserve their culture, and to just make a better future for everyone that is inclusive, that is respectful of the legacy that's behind human creativity. And we are artists ourselves. My parents are both traditional artists. They graduated from the School of Fine Art in Paris. I'm a painter myself in my spare time. So using AI is not something that I feel is preventing me from expressing myself as a traditional artist. If anything, it's augmenting me, it's not replacing me. And that's how I'm trying to teach it when I go to McGill, when I go to Boston and I give those lectures. Yes, I start with the risk, I start with the potential problems that it comes with, but I quickly go to ideation, to brainstorming. And you would be surprised, like people that have used this tool sometimes just for the first time give projects and amazing storylines to life that are just inspiring even to myself. I learn more when I teach than the other way around. And I find that if everyone had the opportunity to see it the way that we see it, Debbie sees it as a creator and a producer, as Will and I see it as artists, I think we will have amazing stories. And so that's my kind of hope for the future.
And then, Will, thank you, Manu, and that's the work you're doing there, especially with the marginalized communities and traveling to places where they haven't. These tools are available. They're through the internet. You just go to a web browser, but people don't know about them. So you working with those communities and spreading that message to open these up to people that don't normally do these kind of creative works because they haven't had access is incredible. And I think Protopica will, as you've already sort of said, will guide people into how to use these tools in the right way, which I think is amazing. Will, I mean, for you as well, I mean, maintaining sincerity and authenticity in the work that you do, because obviously you're an amazing creator. We've seen some of the work that you've done. I've worked with you personally and seen you work. How do you feel like balancing, getting your hands really dirty in like creating versus, now having the use of these tools? I mean, where do you stand with all of that?
Yeah. Thank you again for that, Adam. And I think I actually gave a lecture yesterday at my alma mater at Oak Ridge University, and that was a big part of it. That a lot of designers from their feedback was figuring out where AI can coexist in the creative process without overtaking the human aspect of creativity. And I think for me is the stage at which I introduce any AI tool matters a lot in my process. So I look at it as a tool of augmenting our output and presenting maybe new variations of ideas that we already had in mind or that we were trying to go from, very I'm a very visually communicative person versus sorry, I'm very visual, but verbally communicating is not necessarily my forte when it comes to the creative process. So using something like ChatGPT makes a lot of sense for me. And for someone who's more verbal and less visual, using something like Midjourney makes a lot more sense. And not to say that they're meant for, you know, those categories, but just like as a tool of language or as a language labeling tool, I think it's really important to recognize that potential. But at the end of the day, they're augmentation tools. Like if you try to augment from zero, you're still augmenting zero. You know what I mean? Like if you start introducing it from the very beginning of your process without even giving it a single thought, giving it a try, going for a walk, doing it the nitty-gritty way. So something that I found myself doing a lot in the past 3 years is going back to like very manual analog processes. So an example is I went to Japan earlier this year and I left my digital camera and I took everything, shot everything in film. I got into pottery, I got into all this like very tactile things because I was realizing that there's this sort of like element through AI that, at least for me, um I don't feel like I don't know. I don't know if I can take a full ownership of every step of the process if I'm not like very involved from the beginning. So I've had this conversation with a lot of creatives from around the world, and it seems like as we evolve, as tools evolve, and our relationship with AI evolves, it's really important to like keep ourselves grounded in those design and artistic processes that make us just flow and be creative. And even though this sounds a little bit like, you know, like poetic, at the end of the day, the creative and our way of coming up with ideas that ChatGPT could never come up with is what makes us special. So I think for me, yeah, like the where I introduce AI in my process has had a big impact. So bringing it back to Protopica, and I'll leave it at this. We actually didn't introduce AI into much later of our process. We went for walks, we went to the pool, we went to the sauna, we like did all the things, and then we came back to the drawing board. We're like, okay, let's actually write this down on paper, pen and paper. And we started with voiceover, which is a very unconventional way of working for us. A lot of people come up with a bunch of videos, edit it together, and then throw a voiceover on top. We decided to have a more inside out process. And honestly, it came out the way it came out because we approached it that way. If we were trying to just showcase the cool features that Sora has to have, we could have spliced two videos together and sent that and, you know, call it a day. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. But that's how I see it.
Well said.
Okay, wonderful. I think, you know, we've covered a lot. I know time is tight for everybody on this call today, so I don't want to dive too much deeper into another subject that will take us over time. But what I did think we could do for the last few minutes here is maybe just individually, if you could just maybe give your feelings on the future and how you feel the future of filmmaking is going to evolve over the next couple of years. You guys, Will and Manu, especially, you've had access to these tools, and Debbie as well. I'd just be very curious if you could just want to give us a couple of points on how you see the future evolving with the tools, because we're certainly not there. We are at the very beginning here. Sora isn't even out to the general public yet, but I myself have seen very efficient workflows, you know, producing an image in Midjourney and then taking that image into Runway and then using, you know, deep faking to get faces. So I've seen these tools, they're working really well, but they're still not where they're going to end up being. And I'm very curious how you see the future evolving with that. Why don't we kick off
Debbie,
with
do
you,
you want to
Manu?
start?
Yeah.
Me first? Okay.
Yeah, why not?
I have a very interesting take on this because I think there is two ways that we're seeing the tools being used. Like you mentioned, with this very particular workflow from generative image, generative video, then Runway Act One, where you can actually use your face to do stuff. We're kind of seeing the rebuilding of what virtual production 3D has already been making. You know, we have Unreal Engine Live Link being used for doing things like that, or Debbie using the dancer with Unreal Engine and motion capture. And so people just want more control. And I think from artists' perspective, generative AI historically, when it started, was really a lack of control and a lot of weirdness, 6 fingers and things like that. But the lack of being able to actually say what you want to do and explain it very perfectly. There's a lot of kind of a random dice button that's happening with Gen AI. And so right now, I think artists are more curators, where they have to actually filter down to get what they really want out of it, as opposed to a maestro. And I think we're going to get to the maestro phase very soon. The tools are getting better, the control that they are giving in features. Product designers are starting to work with Gen AI companies to actually build better UX, more accessible tools. And like Will said, some people have just very different neurodivergent way of seeing art. Like some people are very visual, some people are more verbal, some people have language that are nonverbal and need to express themselves as well with these tools. So I hope to see more companies not thinking that, oh, Midjourney exists, so we should not even try to do Gen AI. Like, no, there's space for everybody to interface with these tools in different ways. That's what we're exploring with Brain as well and other aspects. But from a perspective of what it means for the future of filmmaking, I'm actually very hopeful because yes, a huge portion of the population now have access to these tools and anything can be done. So we will see potentially a saturation of content. Too many stories being told is not a problem in itself, but when it comes to discoverability and for the right stories to be heard, then it's a problem. If you're part of a giant pool, you're just a droplet. It's kind of tough. But people as consumers will also feel that saturation and desire something that's maybe more handmade or that feels more like home. So we'll see artists, similar to what Will is saying, going back to pottery, going back to having more control and doing more physical stuff. Consumers will also want things that are maybe non-AI generated, or if AI is involved, it is a more subtle way and not just generational aspect only. And I hope to see that because the power of using these tools is not to replicate what we can already do with traditional filmmaking practices. With Protopica, a lot of the shots could not have been made with a traditional camera or VFX. We had to use AI to be able to have those surreal movements and those transition. And I want to see that. I want to see new filmmaking capabilities happening thanks to AI. I think there's many techniques that will be discovered very soon that will be completely new to the eye of human creativity, and that will bring new storytelling opportunities as well. Maybe non-linear storytelling is something that we're going to continue to see, like we do with our short film, but hopefully other people can tap into that and expand on it. And I'm hopeful that as that saturation happen, then things will emerge, and it's very a cycle. So I think we'll go back to the old way of doing things, and implementing the mix of traditional workflow with emerging technologies will spur new narratives. So I'm excited. I'm super optimistic because of that.
Thank you. Those are great points. And Debbie, I think, that's what certainly some of the things you'll be looking for in curation in the future with the likes of Signals, but yourself as well. I mean, do you share those sentiments with like the real creativity mixed with the AI is what people will end up wanting to see, not just AI stuff?
Yeah, I agree with basically everything Manu's saying. And like one of the things that I love talking with Will and Manu about and is Protopica or utopias or whatever those futures are or whatever those stories are that can orient us towards positive, hopeful, interconnected, joyful futures. And one of the things I think about with AI a lot is, our history or our lineage as humans is so defined about how we communicate stories or how we pass down information, and how we communicate what we're thinking about, what the world is like. And but we, especially in Western European and North American cultures, right now we live in such a world that kind of quashes creativity. Like, we start in kindergarten and early childhood with our pencils and our clay and our Legos and our whatever it is that helps us build and imagine. And that slowly gets taken away from us because we must orient ourselves towards making money, and art doesn't make money, and all of these things that we're kind of told. But we're all born so creative, and that's the beauty of being human, is this wild capacity we have for imagination. And what I'm excited about is how these new tools will empower that imagination even more. I'm so excited to see people who feel like they've been prevented or had their creativity taken away from them explode with their creativity, and what that will mean for their lives, whether it's just in a small way or maybe they start becoming artists all the time. But that's what I meant.
They get to play again, right? That's
Yeah.
what we did as a kid, and that's so funny you mentioned that. It's like that's suddenly there's just like you get to like 12, 13, and it's like, right, that's it, cut off, playtime's over. But really, yeah. So no, that's really exciting. And Will, I know you've got to head to set in a minute, but anything you want to finish us off with?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously I have a lot of conversation with Debbie and Manuel on this topic, so it's highly resonate with everything they've said. And for me, it's that fine line between empowering creatives to be themselves versus taking away. So I'm excited for tools that are designed by creatives, especially working with brands that are constantly QAing and having creatives be part of the process of the creation of these tools versus only product developers and engineers. And I think it's really important to have a more diversity in the trades of the people who are present when these tools are designed. So what I'm excited about is just exactly that, having more voices in these tables when it comes to designing tools that are meant for us at the end of the day. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so honored to have had you guys on with me. I think the audience here, you've been very fortunate to have three wonderful individuals who know so much about this space and are already contributing and working in this space. So thank you so much. We're going to have obviously their bios and info. I recommend you guys go out and look at the work these guys have been doing. I also would imagine, Manu, hopefully there'll be a few more people interested in checking out the masterclass after this as well, because that sounds like a really great way to get a more rounded understanding of what's happening here. And what would be interesting is I think probably we can say we'll reconvene in a year and maybe have a follow-up for the next year's festival to see how things have changed, and also to sort of see where the journey with Protopica has gone. I'm very excited, and I know you guys are working on further iterations. You're submitting to other big events, so we'll stay tuned for that. But thank you for the work you do. And Debbie, Signals this year, IM4 Lab, what a wonderful thing to have in our city in Vancouver. So thank you for that. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and I look forward to seeing more of it.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.